What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Evereth, Viceroy of Plunder. Evereth is a 2/2 for 2 and a black, and has flying, sacrifice an artifact or creature to put a 1/1 counter on Evereth and give her lifelink if the sacrificed object was a treasure, and whenever she dies, you can pay 2 to deal damage to each opponent equal to her power. Evereth is really an all-in-one sort of package. She has an ability that allows you to freely sacrifice a creature or artifact while making her bigger, and another ability that lets you capitalize on making her bigger whenever she dies. The really interesting thing about her is the lifelink clause on the sacrificed ability, if you sacrifice a treasure. Since her death trigger deals damage, if she has lifelink when she dies, you'll end up gaining all that life you deal to your opponents, making the swing in life totals even larger than normal. Due to this, we'll want a deck that focuses on making two things: treasures and a lot of creatures. For creatures, since we have access to red, we can capitalize on one of the best creature types known for making large armies: goblins. With that, let's get into the card highlights. Before we get into the sacrifice fodder, let's look into ways that we can make Evereth even bigger whenever we activate her sacrifice ability. Blade of the Bloodchief, Sadistic Glee, and Tarian Soulcleaver all put a +1/+1 counter on the equipped or enchanted creature whenever a creature dies, exactly like what Evereth herself does. Since Evereth is a vampire, she'll benefit from the Bloodchief's Blade's second ability of putting an additional counter on the creature, giving her 2 counters instead of 1. The Soulcleaver is especially similar to Evereth, since it will also trigger off of artifacts going to the graveyard, making all those treasure sacrifices trigger it as well. These are very nice ways to make Evereth bigger, much quicker than you normally could with just her own ability. Now for the treasure generators, we have quite a few options to choose from. Pitiless Plunderer and Mahadi Emporium Master will both generate treasures when creatures die. This fits well with our overall theme of sacrificing creatures to Evereth to make her bigger. With these cards, those creature sacrifices will also generate treasure, which we can then in turn use to sacrifice to Evereth as well. Descent into Avernus is a nice token generator that can snowball out of control quickly. Not only does it generate treasure for us, it also has the capability to do significant damage to our opponents, allowing us to sacrifice Evereth earlier to end the game. Ruthless Technomancer and Warren Soul Trader both have built-in effects that allow us to sacrifice creatures to create treasure tokens. Using creatures to activate the Soul Trader's ability over sacrificing them to Evereth may only be beneficial when you need the mana from the treasure, but it's also a free sacrifice effect, so you can use it to get Evereth's death trigger to activate. The Technomancer is also a great way to get the death trigger for Evereth, since it'll allow you to likely create a ton of treasure that you can simply use to recast her, or just save to reactivate her ability when she comes back. Zorn is simply a nice and efficient way to let you generate more treasure over the course of the game. Now for the creatures. As I mentioned before, we're going to be focusing on goblins, since we can generate a ton of them pretty quickly to use as fodder for Evereth. Perhaps the best goblin generator in all of Magic, we have the 3 Krenkos: Krenko Mob Boss, Krenko Baron of Tin Street, and Krenko Tin Street Kingpin. Not much needs to be said about these. They're all very efficient ways to generate a ton of goblins. One thing I will say, however, is that the Baron of Tin Street works especially great with Evereth, since she can sacrifice artifacts. Sacrifice an artifact with her ability, pay 1 red, and you can get a goblin token that you can also use to sacrifice to her ability, letting you effectively double your artifact sacrifices if you can pay the mana. Goblin Offensive and Goblin Negotiation are both great X spells that will let us generate a ton of goblins if we have a lot of mana. Since one of our themes is already treasures, there's a high likelihood we could create a ton of goblins at most times, if we want to. Not to mention, if need be, Goblin Negotiation can act as a simple, albeit potentially expensive, removal spell and nothing else. Goblin Rally is a relatively cost-effective spell to net us a good amount of goblins at once as well. Whenever talking about goblin tokens, I always like to mention the siege gangs as well, with the commander and the newer lieutenant. Admittedly, the lieutenant is going to be better most of the time, since it's a consistent token generator as opposed to a one and done, but they both have their place. Since we have a goblin sub-theme, both of their activated abilities may also come in handy, which is where the commander actually outpaces the lieutenant. Now that we have the treasures and the goblins as fodder for Evereth, we need ways to actually get Evereth to die to trigger her death ability. My favorite way to do this is with fling effects. That is, cards that let you sacrifice a creature and deal damage to something equal to its power. For this, we have the namesake of the effect, Fling, as well as Pyrrhic Blast and Kazul's Fury. Kazul's Fury is nice because it's a dual-faced card, letting you use it as a land if you're mana screwed, and Pyrrhic Blast replaces itself when used. Regardless, since our goal is to make Evereth massive with +1/+1 counters, the damage from these effects is nothing to scoff at. You'll be able to easily one-shot an opponent between one of these spells and Evereth's ability itself. We also have a few utility lands that can help us kill our Evereth. Phyrexian Tower will turn our Evereth into 2 black mana, and High Market will gain us 1 life. Both of these are rather small in the grand scheme of things, but the important thing is to have these sorts of free sacrifice effects to make sure we can consistently sacrifice Evereth at a moment's notice. Since Evereth herself deals the damage with her ability, there's one keyword that we can use that will end a game very quickly: Infect. For this, we have Phyresis and Tainted Strike as 2 of the easiest ways to give her Infect, letting us kill our opponents all at once if we can remove her while she's at a measly 10 or more power. These make for very easy and efficient win conditions that can be hard to stop, but do come with some social baggage as well. I've never minded poison myself, which is why I included them, but others may, so these cards should be considered optional depending on your playgroup or meta. Card draw is something that I always harp on in deck builds, and this is no exception. Since we have a treasure sub-theme, we actually can make great use of some of my favorite card draw spells in the game. These are the cards Big Score and Unexpected Windfall, which both draw us 2 cards and give us 2 treasure tokens, all for the low cost of some mana and discarding a card. Deadly Dispute is actually very good in here too, probably even better, as its additional cost is sacrificing a creature or artifact, something that the deck is already designed completely around doing. It does only give us 1 treasure, but it also costs half of the other 2 spells, so it equals out in the end from that perspective. Finally, we have some good utility cards that work well with the themes of this deck. Solemn Simulacrum is already a great way to ramp a land for us, but since we have a commander that has a sacrifice effect, we can also get the card draw whenever we want it, giving us multiple benefits. Academy Manufactor is an auto-clued in any treasure deck, and this one is no exception. The more fodder we have to sacrifice to Evereth, the better, and foods and clues are no exceptions. Tempt with Vengeance is an interesting one. It gives us more token fodder, but can be devastating to your opponents depending on their actions. Don't get me wrong, your opponents should never be tempted by this card in an Evereth deck, as doing so could potentially end the game on the spot. That being said, not everyone may see or think of that, so I think it's a good include to see if you can trick your opponents into giving you more tokens than you should have. Similar to the Simulacrum, Ichor Wellspring and Mycosynth Wellspring are 2 artifacts that can give us extreme benefits in this deck, since they have both an enter and a to the graveyard trigger. Land Ramp and Card Draw are 2 of the best things you can do in a game of Magic, so getting both sides of their effects while also making Evereth bigger in the process is a win all around. Since it'll be pretty easy to give Evereth lifelink, Sanguine Bond is a great include to help one-shot an opponent when she dies. Pair Sanguine Bond with a Fling and at least somewhat large Evereth, and you'll easily be able to one-shot 2 opponents all in one fell swoop. Here's an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include more Goblin and treasure token generators, like Hordling Outburst and Revelant Riches, a great removal spell that can double as a win con in Chandra's Ignition, and additional ways to give Evereth lifelink with Witch's Clinic. Honestly, Evereth seems like a commander made just for me. She's in my second favorite color pair in Rakdos. Vampire is my favorite creature type in all of Magic. She has some sweet anime art, and she has a sacrifice ability paired with a burn ability, 2 of my absolute favorite things to do. Suffice it to say, I'm very excited about this deck and the commander in general. Biases aside, I will say she's also a very powerful commander, as she's got 2 absolutely great abilities that act as both an engine and a payoff all in one. You don't get that very often with commanders, especially ones that can end the game on the spot with them. The only real downsides to Evereth is the fact that you'll likely need to always make sure to keep 2 mana up, in case she's removed by an opponent. Though that shouldn't be too hard since we have a treasure sub-theme for the deck and can generate a lot of mana in most situations. The other downside is non-destruction removal, like exile or bouncing, as those will completely negate the ability to get her death trigger while also undoing all the work you've put into her by removing all the +1/+1 counters. That's why it's important to have those instant speed and free sacrifice abilities. That way, you can sacrifice her yourself at a moment's notice to still get her trigger. Overall, I think Evereth is going to be a commander to be reckoned with, and I know that I'm personally very excited to get some games in with her. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Evereth, Viceroy of Plunder. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the Architect link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.